It was a bright afternoon in downtown New York when former U.S. President Donald Trump's Cadillac Motorcade made its way through the bustling streets. The convoy, consisting of several black SUVs and the iconic Cadillac one, was moving steadily, surrounded by security personnel ensuring his safe passage. However, as the motorcade approached a narrow intersection, an unexpected event brought everything to a halt. A group of heavily tattooed men, clad in leather jackets and exuding an intimidating presence, suddenly stepped into the road, blocking the path of the presidential vehicle. The Secret Service agents reacted instantly, forming a protective barrier around the car, their hands inching toward their holsters. Bystanders gasped, some pulling out their phones to capture the unfolding chaos. Tension filled the air as the gang leader, a burly man with a scar running down his cheek, stepped forward.
No one could have predicted what happened next. Instead of waiting for his security team to handle the situation, Trump himself took an unprecedented step that left the world in shock.
The street fell silent as the gang leader locked eyes with the tinted window of Cadillac One. The atmosphere was tense. Secret Service agents had already positioned themselves defensively, hands gripping their weapons, ready to react at the slightest provocation. Then, to everyone's surprise, the door of the armored limousine slowly opened. Donald Trump stepped out. A murmur of shock spread through the crowd. His security team tried to stop him, but with a firm wave of his hand, he signaled them to stand down. He adjusted his suit, straightened his tie, and began walking toward the gang with a confident stride, completely unfazed by the danger in front of him. The gang members exchanged glances, unsure of what to do. No one had expected this. The burly leader, still standing at the front, crossed his arms, narrowing his eyes at Trump. "You're a bold man, stepping out here alone." His voice was rough, laced with suspicion. Trump smirked. "You've got my attention. What do you want?" he asked, his voice calm yet commanding.
The leader hesitated for a moment before responding.
"You think you run this country? You think politicians like you understand what it's like to live on these streets?" There was a brief silence. Then, instead of reacting aggressively, Trump did something no one expected. He reached into his pocket and pulled out something, a folded piece of paper. "You're right. Maybe people like me don't always understand. But let me ask you something, are you standing here for yourselves? Or is there a bigger reason?" The gang leader seemed caught off guard by the question. His eyes flickered with a mix of anger and curiosity. "We don't need your sympathy." Trump unfolded the paper and held it up for him to see. It was a document, an official pardon form.
"Then maybe you need an opportunity."
The gang leader's face changed. His jaw tightened as he recognized the significance of what was in Trump's hands. The crowd watched in stunned silence. The security team was still on edge. Reporters had begun broadcasting the incident live. And at that moment, the fate of the standoff hung in the balance. What would happen next? The gang leader, still processing Trump's words, took a cautious step forward. His eyes flickered between the pardon document and the former president, skepticism and curiosity battling within him. The rest of the gang behind him shifted uneasily, clearly unprepared for this unexpected turn of events.
"An opportunity?" the leader repeated, his voice laced with doubt. "What kind of game are you playing, Trump?"
Trump smirked, tucking the document back into his suit pocket. "No game. Just business. You think I don't know what's happening on these streets? I know people like you, tough, smart, but stuck in a system that doesn't care. The question is, do you want to stay in the gutter or do something bigger?
The gang leader clenched his jaw, clearly torn. The tension in the air was palpable. Secret Service agents remained on high alert, ready to act at any moment. The media cameras were rolling, broadcasting the unprecedented standoff to millions around the world.
One of the younger gang members, a wiry man with a buzz cut, whispered something into the leader's ear. The leader nodded slowly before turning his full attention back to Trump. "You're telling me, you're offering us a way out?" Trump folded his arms, his expression unwavering. "That depends. I don't do charity. But I know talent when I see it. And I see a group of men who could be more than just street thugs. So here's my offer, drop the tough guy act. Walk away from the life you're living now. And I'll give you a shot at something real." A murmur rippled through the gang. Some of them exchanged uneasy glances. A few scoffed, unwilling to believe it. But the leader remained silent, staring at Trump as if trying to read his true intentions. Then, without warning, he laughed. A deep, rough laugh that startled even his own men. "You've got guts. I'll give you that." His expression darkened slightly. "But why should I trust you?" Trump took a step closer, now just a few feet away from the gang leader. "Because the world is watching. Because if I wanted you gone, you'd be gone already. And because I never make an offer twice." The gang leader's smirk faded. He looked over his shoulder at his men, then back at Trump. A decision was about to be made, one that could change everything. The gang leader's fingers twitched slightly, his mind racing. He could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him. The world was watching, the cameras rolling. And right in front of him stood one of the most powerful men in history, offering him something no one had ever offered before. His men, still uncertain, shuffled behind him. Some looked ready to walk away. Others, especially the younger ones, seemed intrigued. The promise of something bigger than their street life was tempting, even if it came from a man they had once considered untouchable. Then, the leader shook his head. "You think you can just walk in here, wave a piece of paper, and change everything?" He spat on the ground. "That's not how the real world works, Mr. Trump."
Trump didn't flinch. He let the words settle in the air before responding.
"You're right. The real world is tough. That's why people like you either end up in prison or in power. The choice is yours."
The gang leader's jaw tightened. His men were whispering, some urging him to take the offer, others warning him it was a trap. The media cameras zoomed in, broadcasting every 10th second.
Then, one of the younger gang members, a boy no older than 18, suddenly stepped forward. His face was rough, his eyes hardened by the streets. But there was something else, hope. "I want in," the boy said, his voice steady. The gang leader turned sharply.
"What the hell are you doing, kid?"
The boy swallowed hard but didn't back down. "You always told us we were fighting for something bigger. Well, maybe this is it."
The silence that followed was thunderous.
Trump's lips curled into a knowing smile. He could see the shift happening. "Smart kid," he said. "Now, what about the rest of you?" The gang leader hesitated. His entire life had been built on control, on never backing down. But now, in front of him, the cracks were showing, not just in his gang, but in himself. He exhaled slowly, knowing that whatever decision he made next would change everything. Would he accept the offer and rewrite his story? Or would he reject it and face the consequences? The gang leader clenched his fists. His mind a battlefield of conflicting thoughts. The world was watching. His men were waiting. And Donald Trump, standing before him with his signature smirk, was challenging everything he had ever believed. His entire life. He had been told that power belonged to those who took it. That respect was earned through fear, not negotiations. And yet, here was one of the most powerful men in the world, offering him a way out, not with threats, not with handcuffs, but with an opportunity. The young gang member who had stepped forward stood firm. His gaze locked onto the leaders. "You always said we had to fight for our future," the boy said. "Well, this is our shot." Some of the other gang members shifted uneasily. A few nodded in agreement. Others still held on to their skepticism. But the uncertainty in their eyes was clear. Trump took a step forward, closing the distance between himself and the gang leader. His voice, though calm, carried undeniable weight. "You've spent your whole life proving you're tough. You've built a reputation. But tell me, what's tougher? Staying in the same cycle until it destroys you? Or walking away and building something real?" The gang leader's breath hitched. He had spent years fighting his way to the top of the streets, commanding respect through fear and dominance. But now, in this moment, he felt something else creeping in, doubt. One of his lieutenants, a muscular man with a shaved head, stepped up beside him. "Boss, maybe it's time."
The leader shot him a glare. But there was no defiance in the man's face. Just tiredness.
The weight of the decision pressed down on him.
Finally, he exhaled, his shoulders relaxing slightly.
"And what if I say yes?" he asked, his voice quieter than before. Trump's smirk widened.
"Then you and your men stop running these streets like criminals, and start running them like leaders." A murmur spread through the gang. The idea was radical. Unbelievable. And yet, something in Trump's tone made it sound possible.
But before anyone could respond, a screech of tires echoed through the street. A second group of men appeared from the alleyways, dressed in dark clothing, armed and looking ready for a fight. The leader's face hardened instantly. "Damn it," he muttered under his breath. Trump's Secret Service agents sprang into action, forming a protective wall around him. The tension in the air turned deadly. The newcomers were not part of his gang. And they weren't here to talk. The real danger had just arrived. The sound of screeching tires echoed through the tense streets as the second group of men emerged from the shadows. Their faces were grim. Their eyes locked onto the gang leader and his crew. Some carried baseball bats. Others had their hands tucked inside their jackets, possibly hiding weapons. Trump's Secret Service agents didn't hesitate. In a flash, they positioned themselves, their hands hovering over their holsters, ready for any sudden movements. The gang leader's crew instinctively reached for their own weapons, their loyalty to their boss outweighing their uncertainty about Trump's offer. The leader's jaw tightened. He knew these men. They weren't just some random street gang. They were from a rival organization. One that had been watching him closely for years, waiting for a moment of weakness. And now, with Trump standing in front of him, they must have assumed he had finally lost control. One of the newcomers, a tall, lean man with a jagged scar running down his cheek, stepped forward. His voice was low, laced with menace. "So this is what it's come to," he sneered. The great leader of the streets, shaking hands with politicians? The gang leader took a slow breath. His mind raced, trying to calculate the best way out of this situation. If a fight broke out here, it wouldn't just be a street brawl, it would be a war. And with the media cameras rolling, the entire world would see it unfold.
Trump, ever the showman, remained calm. He adjusted his cufflinks and took a step closer, speaking before the gang leader could respond.
You must be the competition, he said smoothly, eyeing the scarred man. I've met a lot of guys like you. Always looking tough. Always thinking small. Tell me, is this your big moment? Gonna make a statement in front of the world? The scarred man narrowed his eyes. He hadn't expected Trump to address him so directly. This ain't about you, old man. This is about respect. Trump smirked. Respect? No, this is about fear. You show up like this because you're scared. Scared that he gestured toward the gang leader, might actually be bigger than you someday. The gang leader flinched, processing the words. His own rival wasn't just here to intimidate him, he was here to test his resolve. The scarred man's fingers twitched, as if debating whether to draw a weapon. The Secret Service agents tensed, ready to react. And then, a single gunshot rang out. Everyone froze. The shot hadn't hit anyone. But it was close, too close. A warning. From the shadows, another figure stepped forward. Someone no one expected. And their arrival changed everything. The sudden gunshot sent a shockwave through the tense standoff. From the shadows, a mysterious figure emerged, a man in his late 60s. Dressed in a sharp black suit. His presence radiating an aura of power and authority. The gang leader's eyes widened in recognition. "Boss," he muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. The scarred man from the rival gang stiffened as well. He knew who this was. Everyone did.
This was Vinny Morello, a former kingpin of the city's underworld. A man thought to have retired, disappeared into the shadows. And yet, here he was, standing before them, holding the smoking gun in his hand.
Trump raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued. Now this is interesting, he mused. Vinny scanned the scene, his gaze cold and calculating. Then, he turned to the gang leader. "So this is what you've become," he said. "A man who lets his enemies walk all over him. A man who needs a politician to come save him." The leader gritted his teeth. "It's not like that." Vinny's eyes darted to Trump. "Then what exactly is it?" Trump, unfazed, took a step forward. "It's called making a deal," he said. "Something I'm pretty damn good at." The scarred man from the rival gang suddenly laughed, shaking his head. "This is hilarious," he sneered. "A street legend, a washed-up gangster, and a former president all in the same place. What a circus." Vinny's expression darkened. "Shut up, kid."
The scarred man's smirk faltered.
Vinny turned back to the gang leader. "I built this empire," he said. "And I didn't build it for cowards. You got two choices, prove you're worthy of leading it, or watch someone else take your place." The leader's hands balled into fists. He knew what this meant. This was a final test. A defining moment. Trump, sensing the tension, leaned in slightly. "Listen, kid," he said. "You can keep playing this game. Keep running these streets. Keep looking over your shoulder, or you can do something bigger. But that's on you." The leader's chest rose and fell, his breath heavy. He looked at Vinny. Then at Trump. Then at his own men. Finally, he made his choice. He turned to the scarred man and stepped forward. This ends now. The scarred man narrowed his eyes. Or what? The leader didn't hesitate. In one swift motion, he reached inside his jacket and threw his gun to the ground. Gasps rippled through both gangs. Even Vinny looked surprised. The leader turned back to his men. "I'm done fighting for scraps," he said. "We either build something real, or we walk away." Silence. Then, one by one, his men followed suit, tossing their weapons aside. The scarred man's face twisted in rage. "You think you can just walk away?" he barked. Before he could react, Vinny stepped in.
"I think they just did," he said coldly. "And if you're smart, you'll do the same." The scarred man's jaw clenched. He looked around, his own men were hesitating, their confidence shaken. The power had shifted.
With a final glare, he spat on the ground, then turned to leave. His gang followed, disappearing into the night. The threat was over. Trump smirked, adjusting his tie. "Now that's what I call a deal."
The leader exhaled slowly, the weight lifting off his shoulders. He had just made the hardest choice of his life. And for the first time in years, he felt free.
Vinny watched him for a long moment. Then, with a small nod of approval, he turned and walked away into the darkness.
Trump's Secret Service agents relaxed. The media cameras were still rolling, capturing every second.
The world had just witnessed something unprecedented. Trump clapped the young leader on the back. "Welcome to the real game, kid." As the dust settled, one thing became clear. A new chapter had begun.